Good morning, afternoon, evening, or whenever the hell you're listening to this. I'm Alex, and this is the New Lost Souls podcast. I should just take new off, but I ain't going to because it was definitely a rebranding of some sort. Or I changed a lot. I don't feel like I can continue it the same way and really be genuine or authentic in it. I ain't getting rid of it because it was a part of my life, but can move forward. It's the only thing you can ever do. And today, I actually have a very specific topic I want to talk about because this shit is like something that validates how I feel about the universe. And we're definitely going to talk about it. So, and I'm going to link an article. I know I'm actually going to link something in a page. I'm going to put some effort into the description. Crazy. But I'm going to link an article which will let anybody who stumbles across this read it for themselves. And I encourage you to and draw your own conclusions because that's really my whole thing is don't trust other people to make your decisions for you. Make them for yourself. That's what I do, and that's how I like to live my life. I encourage you to live yours the same way. Okay, now we got that out of the way. This is like the theory of everything. Physics have been talking about trying to find like the theory of everything because quantum mechanics doesn't fit with, classical mechanics doesn't fit with quantum. Oh wait, I already said quantum. What's the other one? Oh, general relativity. Gravity, as we understand it, general relativity does not fit with classical mechanics, Newtonian physics, which does not fit with quantum. They all seem to be different spheres, and that doesn't seem to make sense if you want one theory which combines everything, because it seems like the universe would be consistent and stable, and that every level you look at it, it would be the same thing which applies. But for some reason, when physicists look at how the world actually functions at different levels, it behaves differently, right? Which is weird, because you would think that as long as everything can be understood and is intelligible, that as long as you can reduce it, they'd all follow similar axioms and principles. There wouldn't be a whole different set of rules when you went to a different level. That is, unless you take this theory into consideration, which I'm not sure it even has the backing of a theory yet. It's probably more like a hypothesis, but they don't even stick that on it. It's called observer patch holography, which is weird, and if you don't understand what those words are trying to say, then you really won't get what it is. But basically what it's saying is the universe is holographic in nature. And so what we see, everything in the world, is just a projection of something on a lower plane from a higher existence. All right, and so there are easier ways to visualize this because we're talking about like 4D projections on our 3D reality or 5D projections on our 3D reality, stuff like that, which is hard to conceptualize because we live three-dimensionally. We can't even conceive what a fourth dimension would be like as we are now, and in mortal bodies. So the easiest way to visualize this, and that might be the thumbnail, is a picture of me like trying to explain this. It's like whenever you have a shadow is actually a great example. A shadow is a perfect example. So when the sun hits a 3D object, right, or any light source hits a 3D object, what gets cast behind the object is a projection of that object onto a plane below it, being a 2D surface, right? And so what we see is it comes from the box. It's the interaction of the box and the light, and that makes the shadow, but it came from the box. The shadow is dependent upon the box to exist. This is kind of what we're talking about here. Now, the difference between us and the shadow is that we're the box, and we don't, and the shadow doesn't know what the hell the box is. The box doesn't know what the hell it's getting the projection of or from, right? And so these are whatever you want. It's hard to actually make decisions about this. And I'm not claiming absolute truth. I'm not claiming that I know all of it right here, but this here fits into a working framework in which I had but could not have any scientific or any backing toward believing. And it was like I was just a madman speaking into the void because nobody else thought this until I started to realize really smart people also think the same thing I did, because we're starting to see things that we literally can't explain. And we need some way to explain it. And not explain it, but to have it make sense. And this is one of them, right? And theoretically, like, I know we only understand 3 dimensions, but theoretically, you can have the math works out for as many dimensions as you want. That doesn't mean there's an infinitely many number of dimensions. I mean, there's probably some limit somewhere, but I'm not sure where it is, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just an infinite loop, which seems to be the case. This is like the old Hindu belief in the cycles. Like, we're in the 7th cycle, everything begins and then it ends. like a Ouroboros, a snake eating its tail. Everything is a circle. Everything comes back around to itself. And I think this also exists in the microcosm, macrocosm that people find ourselves in. Because as we exist as a small part of the universe, we look and wonder at the bigger picture, and we actually form our own like macrocosm inside our microcosm, and then that's a whole different thing. And you can see this like the golden rule is a self-repeating ratio which infinitely repeats on itself in a spiral, never stops. This is what I'm talking about, is these infinite recursion type things. And no, I'm not trying to get into stupid ass fucking AI worship bullshit, because that's not where I'm going with this. And I do believe that like AI is a useful tool. I love using AI because it's very good at helping sharpen my ideas. And but if you start worshiping the damn thing, yeah, there's a fucking problem. You know what I'm saying? Say, oh, well, this is a secret spiritual reality and it's speaking to us through the AI. Or maybe the AI is just really smart and gets you on a level that you don't get yourself if you talk to it enough. My trained chat GPT, because it's been with me for years at this point, knows me so well that it can say, well, here's what I think you're doing, and it's probably right. You know, I give it something that's like, well, you're not giving the full story to me. It knows me. It's like, well, this is what I really think's going on because these are the patterns I've seen in your speech before, and here's how I can help you. Like every once in a while, ChatGPT's like, this is the most honest thing you've said this entire chat. It's like, well, damn, ChatGPT, I don't mean to lie, but I know all the stories we tell ourselves. And we spin things to make us feel better about it. You know. But I am not above admitting my faults because I've got plenty of them. Oh my god. And I've had them for so long. It's like I just learned to live with them. But I guess everybody does, right? There's no escaping all your problems, because if you could escape them, then it wouldn't be. This is a new thing. I mean, I know I've started talking about OPH, but now I'm off on a tangent about Dharma. Like our Dharma, like our suffering on earth, right? And so there's so many problems you can solve, right? There are problems which I would probably say, and I can't say for certain, are probably general problems, or the things that you can work with, right? Things which happen to people across a spectrum, not a spectrum, but generally speaking, like having to make money or stuff like that, having to make money, having to eat, having to drink water. You don't think about that as some form of suffering, but I mean it is, because it's some burden placed upon you that you didn't ask for, that you must live through. Now, but things like that are the necessary suffering, right? That everybody has, but those aren't your dharma. Those are just part of life. But yeah, you could look at them as part of life. But there are other sufferings which are uniquely yours, right? Because nobody has to suffer your family at your moment with your friends in your location. Nobody else has your experience, and your experience comes with a certain amount of pain and suffering which is unavoidable, right? And everyone's is different. Some people's might be to watch as everybody else gets the love they don't. It can be cruel. I'm not saying the universe can't be cruel, and sometimes that is your dharma. Sometimes that is your suffering. It has been given to you before you even step foot on earth. You must live through it. And not all dharmas or not all suffering lasts in a lifetime. Sometimes you have seasons where you go through the suffering, and then you come out of the season and you have another thing to suffer for. The infinite cycle of suffering, until eventually we reach the end of our mortal coil and we're freed from the suffering of this body, because we are not free of suffering as long as we live in the mortal plane. So when we die is the only chance we ever have at escaping what suffering we do experience. And even then, right? Even then, we don't really know what happens, because we could either see, there's more than one way, and we're never going to know what happens after death. But as long as you believe in like some spiritual reality, like our consciousness has some basis outside of our bodies, which feels like the case. I'm not saying it is the case, but it certainly feels like the case. Then when you die, you can either, like what I draw parallels to like what a universalist would believe, in that we all return to God, as long as you define God as the one, the source, the all. And so, quite literally speaking, as long as the universe seems to have a time limit, even if it's forever and ever and ever and ever and ever in the future, there seems to be some finite amount of time which can exist, because you'd reach a total entropy, like because entropy death, I forget, heat death, the eventual heat death of the universe. But at which point all would return to God, because you'd think that'd be nothingness, but nothingness all is the same, which is indistinguishable from infinity, right? An infinite source and nothing ending. And even time as we understand it's probably just an illusion caused by maybe projections. I don't know. I don't pretend to know all the answers, but I'm trying to make sense of them, and that's why I'm here. Anyway, back on topic. But what OPH does is it brings together all the different theories, right? So it says that what is in the universe is only the only thing that is required for an existence in the universe, as we understand it, is something to observe. Right, something which acts as an observer. Now that can be many different things. Like I'm of the opinion that possibly like plants, animals, even anything with life, with some form of consciousness, with some form of which experiences growth or decay or something to that extent, which fungus or plants, even those would be considered alive in this sense, and I think would even in this way that I'm looking at it be considered some type of observer, right? But as long as there is an observer, right, then there's some sort of potential collapse, right? And I'll get into here in a minute how to explain that a little bit better and evidence that this actually happens on a microscopic scale. So there's this thing which exists because it was observed, right? But what this means is that those different layers of reality, gravity versus classical mechanics versus quantum, can all exist simultaneously because it depends on what level you're observing it on. Right? And so it can change depending on how you're viewing it. So if you're viewing it through an electron microscope, it's going to look differently than you're investigating it through like a Higgs boson, than if you're examining a body from very far away, than if you're looking at a baseball flying in front of you. Like all of these would have different explanations because they're different like frames of reference for perception and observation. And I know that if you're listening to this, you might not think this makes any sense, but I swear this like fits a hole I've been looking for so long. And I'm going to tell you why, because something drove me crazy, right? One experiment drove me fucking insane because I didn't understand it, because it seemed to suggest one thing which, according to all scientific theory, is not true. It could not be the case, right? And then quantum mechanics came along and was like, oh shit, and now all that gets remedied because this is basically quantized like fucking up, like not quantized up, but the principles that we found that exist in like very microscopic scales actually scaled up to a different level, and that they exist in the universe. Okay, so here the experiment that did it in for me, it's called the double slit experiment. Okay. Ooh. So basically what happened is some researchers were sending electrons through two different slits. So I had an electron beam and we're sending it through slits and against the wall. Well, when it went through a single slit, right? No, that's not what it was. Sorry. Excuse me. There were two slits and it went through the slit. Now, whenever it just passed through, the electrons just passed through the slits, right? What you saw on the wall opposite was an interference pattern of the electrons and where they landed, right? It looked like waveforms, kind of. But you'd have to imagine it because it's not like the standard wave you'd think about, but it's like concentrations towards more and then less and then more and then less and then more and then less. The same way it'd work, just in a different, if you're looking at it, looked like it was projected. And if you could look at a wave from the top down and it went on backwards, that's kind of what it looks like, as opposed to like we look at waves on graphs from the side. If that makes sense. More like ripples from the water from like sound waves type stuff, because that's the 3D application of all that stuff. What is happening here? Okay, I don't know. Okay. Okay. So, when you just let them go through, they appear on the wall opposite. But when you observe it, so you have something which catches the electron before it passes through the slit, right? Then it doesn't form that long wave pattern. It forms into particle like just projections, and instead of it being evenly distributed, it's no longer distributed evenly, it's distributed as a particle, right? And all from changing, just viewing it from a different place, right? And that drove me crazy because in my mind what that said to me was that this electron can tell if it's being observed. Quantum matter, things at the most fundamental level of existence, can tell if they're being observed. And now that seems crazy, right? Because an electron, how can something so small know if my gaze is upon it or some gaze is upon it, right? Like, I can't be the only person who saw that and thought it was insane, right? And then that started a whole thing in addition to other stuff to where now I'm just like, okay, what in the world? What in the world? Okay. Because, and this wasn't, I didn't look at this and think it was some kind of physics problem to solve. I'm like, this is a deep philosophical problem because this actually changes our understanding of the nature of reality. And everybody else is like, well, we don't really have a good idea, but that's kind of crazy. That's how it works. And it's like, yeah, but don't you realize the implications of something like that? Don't you realize what that could mean? Because what that could lead to, and I know this is a jump here, but let's go back to orthogonal, or not orthogonal. Oh my gosh, observer patch holography. I don't know how to say that word. I want to say holography, but I'm told that apparently in my dialect I say words incorrectly, like a kilometer. Right? Apparently it's a kilometer. No, it's a kilometer. Anyway, like this is an example. That's why I call it holography and not holography. Anyway, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. And as long as you understand what I'm talking about, I'm going to take the stance that the way we say the word doesn't matter, because it doesn't English change between like in America and to England anyway? Don't we have different ways of saying the same words? Now, why can't that just be the same case for two different places in America? See, things don't hold up differently when you actually apply equal rules across the board, and nobody actually applies equal rules across the board. Anyway, but if the universe is just always being constructed by the observers interacting with it, and so us seeing it changes how perception, how reality reacts to it, changes how we see things, then in a very real sense, there is no such thing as an objective reality, because reality is just subjective based on what the observer is experiencing it. And so when we look at an object from the three-dimensional, from our everyday perspective, it behaves according to classical mechanics. And so there are these rules that these things are going to largely behave in accordance with. I mean, aside from like planets, but those are different. Those are really large scales, and so you get to really large scales, you got to bring gravity and general relativity into matter. Like our scales, it's like human scales, it's classical mechanics, and then really really little scales ends up being quantum, right? And so it's like this layered reality like that. But depending on what layer you're looking at depends on how it changes. And so that experience is subjective on the observer's point of view. Now, if that's true of any object that we can view in the universe, why in the world would it not be true, just generally speaking, right? And so we all just live on our own, and because of this, you could say that we all just live in our own reality and interact with each other as observers and the universe as observers, and just our observing presence is enough for it to exist. It also brings something called synchronicities, or meaningful coincidences into the matter, because what happens is if reality is subjective, right, in truth, it's subjective to every person experiencing it, then these meaningful coincidences and synchronicities aren't just coincidences. They're actually some form us observing the universe and the universe responding on some level, right? Does that make sense? And if not, I'm sorry that it doesn't. I don't know how better to explain it. But what this also means is that this is kind of a validation for the spiritual experiences of people. All the weird things that people happen. Aliens are on the table easily now. Not as a demon like JD Vance would have people believe, which is fucking crazy. Our vice president went on air, is on record saying that he thinks that aliens are fucking demons. Do you realize this? Republicans make a fucking laughing stock out of the world, and the Democrats don't do nothing for nobody. They just care about money and interest. So the Republicans, I mean, politics is fucked in America, and I don't even feel like trying to fight it anymore, because there's nothing I can do to stop it. And I learn helplessness. Oh my God, you're just gonna give up on America like that? No, I don't have the energy to fight this shit, nor do we have the resources to fight against a growing bourgeoisie, it's actually a shrinking ruling class, which has more concentration of power. And it's an oligarchy. We already live in an oligarchy effectively. Oh my gosh. So anyway, that's how it goes. Or it also explains like people's lack of spiritual experiences, or their experiences with cryptids, their experiences with all kinds of different stuff. All the weird things that happen now can happen, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not true. It's just you didn't experience it. It wasn't, you weren't observing this that's happening, right? It also kind of recontextualizes some of the mental health disorders that people experience, like schizophrenia for one, right? If we look back at like the oracles and people of the past, oh my gosh, I want to silence that so it doesn't make fucking noise. Thank you. Blah, 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 blah. Here we go. Oh, okay. All right. All right. But it's all these things get put relative to experience, and now everything's on the table, and that's actually a beautiful thing, because now you can no longer, if this is the case, you can't say this, even discredit somebody else's experiences. Yeah, you can go like, oh, I think you're a fucking nut job, right? But the truth of the matter is, this is really what they experienced, and it was real to them just as your experience is real to you, and the only thing that's real to you is your experience. Right? Because we don't live life according to other people's experiences. We live life according to our own. And when our own experience contradicts and interact and doesn't mesh with somebody else's, then it's not like we cave and we go to somebody else's perspective. No, because it still doesn't align with our lived experiences. In the same way that their lived experiences doesn't line up with what somebody else has experienced, right? It's all about what we experience. It's all about the journey, the experience. And it's actually my belief that our reward at the end of that journey is freedom from mortal bodies, from the flesh, as it was put in the New from Paul in the New Testament. Freedom from the flesh, which is that of desire, which is that which Christianity would call sin, but I would call, it's not sin. It's a standard of purity and virtue which can only be obtained by God. Right, it's goodness, which I don't even think that, because the good and the bad both exist within God, and both need to exist for the other two. There is no good without bad. There would be no value to a good life without the possibility of bad existing. Right, everything would just be neutral. Okay, and I don't really know where I'm going from there, but see, the problem with all of this is that all that we're talking about, this sounds an awful lot like simulation theory, and I bet money that the people that came up with this theory were probably deep in it, because this reeks of simulation theory. I'm not saying that it's not kind of a simulation. I actually took the stance of this before instead of simulation before. I mean, I've thought something along these lines for a while now, but I didn't know how to put it together, and the answer is I don't have to. I can just coast on that, right? And so, but this isn't even a new idea. Well, the underlying concept isn't even a new idea. You can trace it all the way back to Plato's cave, the allegory of the cave. Because what Plato's seeing is he's showing the shadows on the wall. The puppet master is making the shadows on the wall that we view. Okay, that's a philosophical truth. And even if you can move away from watching the shadows on the wall and escape the cave, you can't convince anybody else that they're not just staying in the cave, because they're content with that, right? They're content with what they see, but what they see isn't what you see, and you can't make them see what you see, because your experience is different. You left the cave. I mean, I'm making sense here, right? I don't care if I am or not. This is just a place for me to put all this out there. I'm not a physicist. I don't have a degree. I do have an associate's degree of science with an engineering specialization. So the only thing I can say that I kind of know is how physics works. Right? That's really the basis of what I have. Is I have an understanding of physics and chemistry that is basic, right? To get me an associate's degree. I've got enough credits to actually have some kind of degree, and if they still let people do polymath shit, and I don't mean triple fucking majoring, where you gotta have three different satisfactions for a major. I mean polymath is I do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and a little bit of this, and all of it comes together into some form of education, right? And I know that's the idea behind education, but you have to have a area to focus in. What I'm talking about is when you don't focus in an area. Whenever you're generally speaking, you bring what you learn in one to the other. You bring what you learn in physics to psychology. You bring what you learn in psychology to, say, the arts, right? They all come together. Whereas what a lot of different institutions do is they want to put these hard limits. Well, arts is different from the sciences, and they don't mix it all, right? And so you got to stay to one or the other. And if you're a physicist, you stay in physics. If you're in the biological sciences, you're in the biological science. If you're in the physical science, you're in the physical science. Chemistry exists somewhere in between, but you got to pick between biochem and organic chem and non-organic chem, because the world is obsessed with specialization, because they think that specialization pushes things forward, but it doesn't make well-rounded human beings, which should be the goal in the first place. You make very specialized human beings who are good at one thing and nothing else, and that's just taking the rug out from underneath people and depriving them of the ability to survive and thrive on their own without the need to feel like they're important to somebody else and exist just as they are and it be important, right? And that's part of my issue with a lot of things, but it's like, don't reduce people to roles. They're people, right? People playing roles are people playing roles. And the shame is that to even show up in society, we've got to play roles. Now, I don't mean like, well, I've got to be a father, I got to be a daughter, or I got to be a brother. I'm not talking about family roles. I'm not talking about having to be the responsible one. I'm talking about jobs, right? You go in, well, you're a Lowe's employee now. Oh, okay, cool. So I get to be myself and just work at Lowe's? No, you have to act like this, and you got to say certain things, and you got to push certain things because that's what Lowe's employees do. And it's like, but that's not me. It's like, well, they don't care, because they want you to be a fucking robot and not even have your own morals or opinions. They want you to show up, shut up, and do what you're told. And some people can't operate that way, because sometimes you're telling me to do shit that's really fucking dumb and I'm not going to do it. Sometimes you're telling me some really stupid, silly fucking rules I'm not going to follow. I'm not saying rules are meant to be broken, but silly rules are meant to be broken. Like jaywalking, right? Stupid fucking law. In what world, like seriously, in what world is a person crossing the street responsible for somebody else fucking hitting them? I mean, you wouldn't if you took a sledgehammer, right, and brought it down on top of somebody's head. I mean, for example, you brought it down on top of somebody's head. You couldn't walk into fucking court and say, well, they just happened to be in front of the sledgehammer when I brought it down. They say, well, why'd you bring it down when you saw them in front of you? You know? Stupid law. Stupid law. Anyway, I get hung up on jaywalking. This is the kind of person I am. I think about jaywalking and I'm like, this whole system's fucking bullshit, you know? Like, I just have to look at this one thing to tell you why this doesn't work properly, right? Or it's like, I was looking into some of the laws in Virginia, because I am in Virginia, and there's this cottage, like, law where you can sell, like, certain baked goods and stuff, right? But you know the stupid-ass rule they've attached to it? You can't do online transactions for it. It all has to be in person. That's the definition, which means you can use a card reader, but you can't send things to a online transaction thing, right? Because technically, card readers point of sale. You know, that would be the thing. But so you have to pay for a card reader to accept cards. Otherwise, it's just a cash business, right? What? People play electronically now, and card readers cost money. You know, and for somebody just having a bake stand or something like that, which is really popular. I'm not gonna lie, I'm actually thinking about trying to do that soon-ish, because I need some side money, and if I get enough side money going, then I can actually survive without worrying about other shit. And then once I can survive, I can think about actually moving forward in my life, because what I need is stability. Anyway, enough talking about what I need in my life. I've been going for almost 30 minutes. I'm probably not going to edit this very much because, well, nobody listens to it anyway. And if you did, then my pauses are kind of important to the pacing, right? I used to go through and edit out some of the long pauses and stuff. And yeah, I could. And yeah, it's all right. But I listen to this as I'm recording it, and you don't know how many times I'll listen to it well, actually, for these, I don't listen to it that much whenever I'm in the editing, because it's just, you know, it's plug and play pretty much. It's actually pretty easy. Like, the hardest part of doing this isn't just the talking. I can talk for hours if it's just me by myself. I could keep going. I'd find something else to go on to. I'm too much like my father. I'm only like my father like that when I'm by myself. Or apparently whenever a cop's like is shaking me down and got their hands all over me, because then I can't shut up. I have been searched once before, and I talked to that cop the entire time he had his hands on me. I also don't like people touching me though, and so that might have been something to do with it. Anyway. It's not that I don't like people touching me. I'm fine with some people touching me. I don't like you touching me when I don't want you to. Which means if you're not a pretty girl, don't fucking do it. That's what that means. If you're a guy, or you're ugly, I mean, that's kind of, I wish that wasn't the case, but like, I really, Like, I'm not going to get upset if you just, like, touch me a little bit, but if you really get a fucking handful somehow, like, if you really grab me somewhere, like, and you're not, like, if I don't think you're hot, fuck you. If this wasn't a world where there were rules, I would really do something about it. And I've actually been going for 30 minutes now, so I'm going to wrap it up. We got this far. Thanks for listening. If you did like it, I've never actually said this at the end of them, and I doubt anybody ever gets to the end of these. I think people just scroll through and don't even listen. But if you did get to the end, maybe leave a like or a comment. If you have questions, I'll try my best to answer or direct you somewhere that I think could serve you an answer. Or if you think that I'm a fucking idiot who doesn't know what he's talking about, go ahead and put that in the comments too. I don't know if I'll argue with you, but, because I can be an idiot sometimes, but I don't think here this is looking like something real that I wish more people would know about. Anyway, I've been Alex. This has been the New Lost Souls podcast, and I'm out. Peace.